Good morning, and thank you for being here at 9 a.m. I know some of you are on West Coast time, so I'm especially impressed. And I have very exciting news, which is that there were, evidently, as of 1 a.m., 6,000 visitors on our website and 120% server capacity, and this is the new enlarged server. So the server's freaking out a little, but this is all good for us, so this is very exciting. I'm very pleased to introduce a legal scholar whose work on the concept as well as policies concerning intellectual property has inspired scholars across fields and disciplines. I know because I'm one of them. Professor James Boyle joined the faculty of the Duke Law School in 2002, having taught law at American University, Yale, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania. He is William Neal Reynolds Professor of Law and co-founder of the Center for the Study of the Public Domain at Duke Law School, the first university center in the world that is devoted to the study of ideas, images, sounds, discoveries, facts, and texts that are not protected by exclusive intellectual property rights, but are instead free for public use and development, very much in the spirit of last night's wonderful talk, for those of you who were there. Professor Boyle won the 2003 World Technology Award for Law for his work on the intellectual ecology of the public domain. Building on the history of the environmental movement, in particular on the creation of the idea of an environment that could then be subject to political regulation and inspire a preservationist politics, he argues in this work that we need a similar politics of intellectual property to preserve the free flow of ideas and innovations, even basic communication, which he believes are increasingly threatened by overregulation and privatization. He has developed and elaborated these ideas in numerous publications, including law review articles, a monograph entitled Shamans, Software, and Spleens, Law and Construction of the Information Society, an edited collection entitled Collected Papers on the Public Domain, and a comic book, Bound by Law, which addresses fair use documentary in film and is available at one of our tables, right? Right. Okay, in the packet. Sorry, it's in your packet. Sorry. Professor Boyle brings an activism to his theories and has worked to found alternatives to the contemporary practices that concern him. He is a co-founder of Creative Commons, which is working to facilitate the free availability of art, scholarship, and cultural materials by developing innovative, machine-readable licenses that individuals and institutions can attach to their work, and of Science Commons, which aims to expand the Creative Commons mission into the realm of scientific and technical data. A member of the academic advisory boards of the Electronic Privacy and Information Center, the Connections Open Source Courseware Project, and Public Knowledge, a Washington, D.C.-based advocacy group working to defend public rights in the emerging digital culture, he also writes an online column for the Financial Times New Economy Public Forum. While crusading for our digital and intellectual rights, Professor Boyle is also a dedicated teacher, which the Duke Bar Association recognized officially in 2006 by awarding him their Distinguished Teaching Award. Let me close by saying that Professor Boyle is remarkably as witty as he is wise. Please join me in welcoming him to Electronic Techtonics Thinking at the Interface.
Thank you, Priscilla. I asked Priscilla to, my suggested introduction was, he's from Duke, and she felt that was not sufficient. Unfortunately, now, of course, she's inspired in you expectations which I will have to strive to meet. I prefer to start with low expectations and then possibly exceed them. I'm going to start, I think probably, although I couldn't be at John Seely Brown's talk last night because I had childcare duties. I'm guessing I'm going to be relatively consistent with what he said. I'm going to start with a premise about digital technologies and their relevance to learning and to science. And the premise is that we don't know what we're doing. You might think, well, thank you. That's very helpful. I can tell you're from Scotland with that vaunted optimism common to your people. Or you might say, as one of my colleagues said, one of my favorite phrases now, that's an insight too deep to use. Actually, a lot of insights are like that, isn't it true? But I actually think that that the fact that we don't know what we're doing, that we really don't know what we're doing in terms of digital technology, learning, and science, is the starting point for us moving forward. It actually tells us a whole set of things that we should do and a whole set of things that we shouldn't do. So I start from the presumption of inability to predict the future, particularly if you're from California, but even if you're from Scotland, inability to understand the full consequences of what we do, and the persistent experience that we will be surprised by what works, and we'll be surprised by synchronicities and connections that we had never thought of. Then I have a second premise. The second premise is that we can learn from the behavioral economists who, these are the group of economists who finally noticed that human beings actually didn't act in the way that economic theory predicted. It took a while. You know, some early guys, you know, Adam Smith, David Hume, Scottish, interestingly, had pointed that out, but it took, you know, a couple of hundred years for them to sort of internalize this, and the behavioral economists went out and said, you know, we find interesting patterns which are not within our assumptions about Homo economicus. We find, for example, that people are violently risk averse in certain areas. This is why you all buy these stupid hardware warranties on your computer appliances. Make absolutely no sense economically speaking. You'd be far better just sticking the money in a bank and fixing the ones that do. But you all do it because of the feeling of regret. Oh God, I could have bought that warranty and I didn't. And you believe that not buying the warranty will cause the thing to break. Admit it, deep in your heart. It's magical thinking. And so they actually study patterns like this. It turns out there are patterns. And the key here is they don't just study them to go, oh, isn't that cute? They study them because you can aim off, you can compensate for the mistakes that you make, for the deviations. So I think we need to acknowledge a second kind of deviation from predicted rational behavior, which is that we are incredibly bad at estimating the advantages of openness, of open systems. That we have a systematic prejudice in favor of control and closed systems. It's not that control and closed systems are always wrong, they're frequently right. But the point is that we overestimate how often they're right and underestimate how often openness will work. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Many of you, this won't work because you're too young, but there's a few in the audience who are as old as me, it might actually work. So I surgically remove from you the last 15 years of your lives, maybe the last 17 years of your lives, and I say, look, I've got a couple of projects I want you to advise me on. I'm thinking of making an encyclopedia. I want the biggest encyclopedia the world has ever known. I want it in pretty much every language, and I want it to cover everything, no matter how trivial. I mean, I want the Encyclopedia Britannica to look like a not even a first draft. I want this thing to cover everything you could imagine, and I want it to be updated in real time. What do I need? They would say, well, two options. They say, we have two plans for you. Which are you going to pick? Honestly, tell me which you would pick 17 years ago. The first option, well, this is a huge effort. We're going to need to assemble people from all around the world, experts. We're going to need to credential them. We're going to need very strong hierarchical control. You know, someone at the top who's the CEO who picks people. We're going to have to go to the experts, make sure they know what they're doing. We're going to have strong copyright control over it, obviously, because to pay for the incredible investment required to do this, I mean, we're going to have to, this is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right? There's just no way it can, right? We're going to have to use trademark control so that the Encyclopedia Boyleana is the image of trusted authority all across the world. We're going to have to get those experts. If they write bad things, we're going to have to fire them. We're going to have to put it together. It'll probably take us 20 years or so. That's just for the first draft. It's going to be incredibly expensive, you understand. And we probably need to make sure that no one except for a very few accredited people can get in and change it. So that's plan number one. Plan number two is, I don't know, we'll put some stuff up on the web and people can like add to it. Be honest. Which would you have picked? Okay? Yeah, right. Like the second plan is really going to work? I don't think so. Second question. So listen, I'm thinking of designing a global computer network. Nice idea, huh? Two plans again. One, it's totally open. anyone can attach to it, right, provided they've got the money to pay for the bandwidth. The protocols that it runs on are open, TCP, IP, HTML, no one controls them. Anyone can get up there and they can put anything up. As a matter of fact, we'll make the platform so simple that you can do innovations on it that we haven't even thought of yet. So you can add technologies we haven't even imagined. That's possibility number one. Possibility number two, you know, we'll have a nice network. We'll let people who are smart enough or accredited enough onto it. We'll have a few things they can do. We'll reinvent something. We might call it the terminal, I guess. Yeah, you know, you can print, you can view, and so forth. Pretty much nothing else. Which do you pick? I think, honestly, you'd say, look at the first one. Well, there'll be porn. Well, check. There'll be spam. There'll be piracy. There'll be illicit copying. Yes, true. Crazy people. Yes, many of those. I mean, anyone could say anything. It wouldn't be like the New York Times or someone authoritative. I mean, if I wanted to write about the Iraq War, I could do it. I mean, how would you judge? And no, come on, that's insane. What you need to do is reinvent Minitel, the French computer system. That's what we need. Again, with the best will in the world, I think you would have chosen the closed option. I think, honestly, you have to admit, even those of you who say, I'm open to the core, it didn't make any sense to you that it should succeed. If I have been correct in describing your intuitions, I know there's some of you saying, I've been open source since 1965. I take my hat off. Nothing else that I say applies to you. You may leave. But for the rest of you, this is disturbing because it means that we're likely to go on making that mistake. It wasn't like mistakes ended 17 years ago. In fact, we have likely made that mistake hundreds, thousands, millions of times, and we don't know about it because the counterfactual, weird, open thing never got created, right? So if we don't know what we're doing, premise one, and we have a systematic bias against openness, premise two, then as we realize the consequences of our ignorance, one of the things we might want to do is say, you know, maybe I don't fully understand the consequences of my technology, my content, my idea. But I bet there's someone out there who has a better idea than me. And wouldn't it be great if they could add, modify, reimagine, recombine my project, right? So that's the basic idea. And I'm going to give you 3 concrete examples in which it's put in place. These are examples drawn from Creative Commons. Priscilla kindly said I was a co-founder of Creative Commons. I was just on the board when it was founded. Larry Lessig and Hal Abelson are the true founders. But I am one of the founders of 2 projects I'm going to describe today. CC Learn, which is a division of Creative Commons focused on education, and Science Commons, which is devoted to science. So let's start with CC Learn. Foundations and governments have created a vast network of open educational repositories and materials around the world. It's really impressive stuff. It's very high quality. Think of things like MIT OpenCourseware, for example, or the Connections site at Rice. It's inspiring to see that we can have open education and the model that everybody thought was going to dominate, namely a model of universities selling their materials to the public to generate a new revenue stream is not the only model of education out there. But frankly, the movement isn't as far along as one would have expected. In fact, if I'd said to you, here are 3 projects 17 years ago, the construction of the Global Encyclopedia, the construction of collaboratively created software, which we want, let's say, 60 or 70% of the web servers to be running on, or open educational resources in which most kindergarten through postgraduate lifelong learning teachers routinely post to and take from material on the web. I say, which of these is the most feasible? You would have picked number 3, because teachers love to share what they do. You can't stop them, right? I'm a teacher. I have this great new plan. I did this great class. You know, you can't shut us up. We want to share our ideas, whether or not you're interested. And yet, if you look at these sites, oddly, they look like fabulous silos of content, separated from each other. If you were to count the number of fruitful interconnections between these sites, it's very low. CC Learn is devoted to the idea that we should break down the barriers between open educational resources and allow people, to the extent it is possible, it won't always be possible, to take from one side and from another, to combine, to remix, to version, to recreate. What are the barriers? There are a number of them. I would say the three most important ones are legal, technical, and cultural. Legally, if you look at these sites, the licenses they're under are completely incompatible half the time. I mean, to take an obvious example, you can't take material from Wikipedia and material that's Creative Commons licensed and put it together, right? Which is dreadful. Now that hopefully won't be true in another 18 months or so, because that's one of the things that we're working on. But that's something a lot of people at Wikipedia are very concerned about. But I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? I mean, you have repositories of open content and you can't combine them. The whole idea of Creative Commons was to enable a global commons of material from which all could draw. Wouldn't it be bizarre if, in fact, it's not a commons of material, but a series of walled plots, each separate from each other? I went to one excellent open educational repository, which said, we're an open educational repository. Its license said that you're forbidden to print multiple copies of its materials. You have to ask for permission specifically to use the materials. You're not allowed to combine them with any other materials. And then, I mean, it went on and on. And I was like, well, what does the word open mean to you? Because, you know, this is not what it means to me. In fact, it was in many ways more restrictive even than copyright law allowed them to make it, right? And which was kind of the ultimate irony. Hey, we've made an open thing, it's got bars. Technically and culturally, I'll take the two together. To quote from a report that John and Dan Atkins wrote, we need to move from the vision of this content is mine to this content is available for mining, right? Right now, how many people who create open educational resources start off by saying, I need to connect this with the global commons of material, and how many of them go, I know exactly who my users are, I know exactly what they want to do, I know exactly how I should give it to them, they're my readers and my viewers, and I'm going to give it to them in the way that I want. That's the way we think. See premise number one. And we don't think about interconnections. See premise number two. So I think technically, wouldn't it be great if, for example, you know, Hal Abelson is working on this really nice live video annotator that can put a transcript of a video up on the fly. You're watching the video. So there's all this video content. Who knows what's in it? Who's going to watch an hour-long lecture? But wouldn't it be great if you could actually text search that and find it? Now, if someone had a tool like that, wouldn't it be great if they could go to all the video on all the open educational sites and just go and say, I'm just going to apply it to all of it? Well, could you do that? Well, no, you almost certainly needed to ask for multiple permissions, which is, of course, exactly the idea that we shouldn't have. So that's project number one, CC Learn. We're not a portal, we're not people who are saying, you know, here, you all have to come through the Creative Commons site in order to do it. You could think of us as the W3C or the IEEE for open content, right? The idea is, let's have a set of best practices which everyone in the community will advise us on. We'll get everybody together, the funders, the sites, and come up with some simple best practices to say, let's make this stuff work together. Because it makes no sense to spend millions, billions of dollars creating balkanized islands of content that can't work with each other. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I think this is beyond debate, to be honest. Yet it's what we're doing. So that's the first project, and I think it exemplifies both of the premises that I was talking about. Let me come to the second project, which is, I hate PowerPoints, so I apologize, but I am going to use one marginally here. I gave a talk at EduCause, and I was about to go in, and they said, well, where's your PowerPoint? And I said, I don't have a PowerPoint. They're like, but this is a plenary. I said, yes, it's okay. So, well, how will you convey ideas? And I said, well, I'm planning to use words. It's like, but what about audiovisual? It's like, well, I'll wave my hands sometimes. And a guy who was standing there goes, hey, it's one of those no PowerPoint people. And he grabbed his friend, and Randy said, I've never seen a no PowerPoint person before. So I guess I'm a fallen angel because I'm now going to be using some PowerPoint, because there are a couple of things on here where it's actually useful to see rather than merely to hear about. So Science Commons has exactly the same goal as Creative Commons in general. The idea is to create, through private agreement, a realm in which it is easier to get material that you need and easy for you, in turn, to grant access to your material on the terms you choose. That's the idea behind Creative Commons. Creative Commons did that by licensing open content. How many of you know about Creative Commons? Let me just ask. Fabulous. That I have to say, you have no idea what a charge that is to see. I would start talking about it, 4 years ago. It's only been going for 4 years, and people go, "What are you talking about?" And now, people routinely come and lecture me about what Creative Commons does, not knowing that I'm associated with it. I love it. So, how would we apply the Creative Commons ideas to science? Well, luckily, we strongly believed in principle number 1. So we spent about a year doing research rather than assuming we knew what the problems were. And what we found were a series of blockages in the scientific process that actually, I think, could be solved by private agreement. Why private agreement? Wouldn't legislation be better? Sometimes it would, but Congress is really expensive to buy, right? And we don't always have the money. And it's slow. And some of it is actually stuff that shouldn't be done through legislation. It's stuff where private agreement works better. So in some cases, this is an achievable second best. In other cases, it's a first best. So what did we find? You might have thought, oh, he's going to start talking about gene patents and blockages to the flow of information because of over-proprietization. I know his shtick. That's what he's going to say. Well, there are problems there. But to be honest, those are not the greatest problems. So if you talk to a scientist about, oh, we need more access to data, they'll say, are you crazy? I have data coming out my ears. I have too much data. I'm drowning in data. The last thing I want is more access to data. So we have to be a little more refined here. What we need to do is find the right material. That is to say, scientists want to find material, and it's not even easy. This is the research cycle, starting off with review of basic material, literature, trying to find the materials on which this is in the biomedical context, let's say the cell lines and plasmids, which the literature is describing, maybe getting access to those, doing an experiment on it, coming up with results, publishing it in the literature. The research cycle continues, right? So this is the picture of the research cycle, and you have to find the relevant literature. So if we search for this gene, P53, we get, those are all the numbers, hundreds of thousands of articles, databases, profiles, abstracts, using conservative estimates, take you 111 years to read all of the material on that page. You don't need more access. What do you need? Well, one of the things you need is to realize, as the executive director of Science Commons, John Wilbanks, said, that while our methods for generating data have gone digital, our methods for finding and comprehending data are still analog. And that in fact, in the scientific literature, where you would think, oh, our searches will be more precise and better, they're frequently worse than they are when you're searching for a good Thai restaurant in Raleigh, right? Which is tragic and actually almost certainly costs lives, because if people can't find the material, then it's slower to do scientific development. So for a long time, we kept saying, there's this semantic web thingy. How many of you know what the semantic web is? Wow, okay. So semantic web, let me, all the people who actually know about semantic web covers their ears for a moment, because this is going to be gross simplification. Semantic web is the web in which the computer understands, those are really big scare quotes here, understands the concepts rather than simply looking for a term. So for example, if you're trying to buy a pocketbook or a pair of Manolo Blahniks, the computer says, this is a representation of Manolo Blahniks for sale, rather than this is a description of them on a fetishist's site, right? Manolo Blahniks are shoes, for those of you who are not into this. So the computer's like, oh, okay, this is a thing for sale, this is a description in an article. The computer, the search process, actually tags things and even understands causal relationships. A is related to B in the following ways. Think subject, object, verb, simple subject, object, verb sentences. A different level of understanding for simply searching for a string of characters that make up a word, which, as we know, can produce interesting results. Okay, so for a long time we kept saying, if only people would apply this semantic web technology more broadly to science, in particularly to the scientific open literature, then great things could come about. And everyone says, that's great, that's great, that's great. And we kept saying, and we in Creative Commons can help you with the legal part. And everyone said, yeah, it's a great idea. What are the problems in doing it? Well, the biggest problem is our biggest problems are copyright and contracts. Many journals are made available under restrictive terms. They're published under, they're copyrighted, so you may not be able to get access to them at all without paying. And even if you can get access, so for example, Duke University has electronic access to a wide range of proprietary journals, the contract that Duke signs with those companies explicitly prohibits us developing any kind of search tools in order to use those journals more efficiently, right? And there are huge liquidated damages clauses, millions of dollars if you actually go through and mine all this material. Why? Because the proprietary companies realize, as sometimes the open access people have not, that the future of scientific literature is not simply about getting access for eyeballs, to a picture of a PDF of a scientific article, but access to machine-readable text to be processed in ways in which value is going to be added, okay? That's where the scientific process is going, and the journals want to control it. Now, this is the second wave of the open access revolution. The first wave is just saying, hey, maybe if we fund this stuff, maybe eventually citizens should be able to read it for free. That sort of communist proposal is, going to once again come up through the NIH, and hopefully that it will be accepted, and they'll say, yeah, at least after 6 months or after a year, we have to get access. But I can assure you that the access that will be offered will be, in many cases, access to pictures of text, where you can't do anything useful with a computer. You can read it with a Mark I eyeball, but as see the 111 years, that's not necessarily enough. Finally, we got tired of telling people that it would be great if we did an open semantic web on an area of science and decided simply to do it ourselves. So you can hardly read this. Could we have the lights down just a little bit, or does that screw up the... Okay, maybe not. So we started out taking all the publicly accessible material. This is generally abstracts, which are in Medline. We got about 16 million of them, and we did text mining on them to try and extract relationships. We're focused only on gene-protein interactions in neurology. We wanted to do a sample project here. So we were able to get 368,000 of them having sort of useful information. What actually am I talking about here? The software has to be able to recognize entities, biological entities. So these genes are all the same in the top line, right? Because of course, scientists are flighty when it comes to using different nomenclatures, and since I may be talking about Entrez gene 1051 and you may be talking about CEPB, we can't interact automatically. Of course, as a scientist, when I read it, I know they're the same things, but that's not enough. This software has to be able to do it. The software also has to understand relationships in some sense, like this activates this upregulates this. This is in the same sentence as this. It might be all we can actually get on this. And translate between standard categories. Here's an example. No possibility on lights here? No? Okay. This is a sentence in a single article. This article is publicly available. Expression of this are upregulated by inflammatory stimuli, therefore possible that this gene would influence neuronal survival. This is in genomic responses in rat cerebral cortex after traumatic brain injury. The software goes through, there are two different ones that we were testing, and actually says, okay, what I want here is a sentence that X does Z to Y, right? I mean, that's what I want to end up with. Notice that it's a little unsure. It's like, oh, I recognize this is a protein, okay, and I recognize it's protein, it's gene number 1051, and it's protein this, so it got that right. It's disease, I know it's inflammation, but the effect, it drew blank on that. It couldn't understand it. The other one did better on some things. It got inflammatory, noun phrases, inflammatory stimuli. It got upregulated. It got this. It got activation of gene expression. The idea is that you would actually build sentences like this, which are connected back to the literature. So if you wanted to say, show me all genes that appear to be upregulated by inflammation, because you're a rheumatoid arthritis researcher who doesn't normally read stuff about brain injuries in rats, right, for very good reason, that this would say, hey, there appears to be something here. Now, let me quickly say, semantic web technology is incredibly primitive, and it will always be primitive. Making bold claims for semantic web is what people have been doing for years, and that hasn't actually worked in producing semantic web technology. It's this sort of idea that you're going to, I don't know why people want to do this, but you imagine it's like you're driving along, you get a toothache, and you say to your phone, find me a dentist with an available appointment within 20 miles. I don't want my phone recommending a dentist to me, and I think this is a really stupid hypothesis. I do, however, want scientific literature mined, and in my view, if we aim low, if we say, can we make search results a bit better, this will develop a hankering among scientists for this. They say, I like that. I want one of them. Scientists are very like 4-year-olds in this regard. Give me one of them. I want it. I need it now, as my... but I said please, as my daughter used to say. But I said please. Give me the cookie. I said please. They're too busy to get excited by abstractions. They need something concrete. And so our goal is to put this out. Here's the metadata, which you certainly can't read, given the fact that the lights can't go off. But it basically simply is a series of these subject-object-verb relationships about scientific claims. And the idea is that this will pull all kinds of things in that you wouldn't have found. But the second thing it will do, which is really perhaps even more important, is there are huge silos of databases that use completely incompatible formats. Imagine having a Rosetta Stone that could translate from one database to another, a public road that linked the database which, for whatever reason, uses the numerical gene nomenclature with the one that uses the alphabetic one. Imagine being able to translate all of those so that these great databases, which right now have to be queried seriatim using completely different search languages, could talk to each other. So that's the idea. Right now we've done the first run, and what we have is a vast, that was helpful, thank you, a vast network, it's basically an enormous text file full of buggy assertions, right, in which people are saying, you know, I think this is what it is. In one of those, I don't know if you noticed, the software got it wrong and actually did the equivalent of saying that, that inflammation causes rheumatoid arthritis, right? They get the causal arrow backwards, right? So starvation is caused by hunger. So of course, this will be full of mistakes. It's something that will then be presumably put in, it's going to be out there in the public domain. Anyone's going to be able to correct it, to curate it, to add to it, think Wikipedia, to add their own data to it and say, you idiots, there's something better you could have done with it. See principle number 1, right? Actually, I have a much better system for running this. Or actually, you screwed up and there's a much better way of doing this in the first place. Fabulous. I mean, if someone comes along and says the whole project is mistaken, we can do it better, then all the better. So, third project. Even if you can find the literature better, and I hope that by coming out with a first draft of a semantic web for neurocommons, we will push other people to do that kind of research, which in turn will focus our open access policies, not just on access to pictures, but on access to machine-readable data. Then there's an additional project. The single biggest cause, easily avoidable cause of slowdowns in scientific research is that people can't get the stuff, the physical stuff on which the research was done. I'm talking now in the biomedical sciences. So what do I mean by stuff? Plasmids, cell lines, mice, zebrafish, right? The raw material on which the scientific experiment was run. This, it turns out, is a huge problem. So 47% of academic geneticists have been rejected in their efforts to secure access to data or materials related to research by other academics, an increase from 34% who'd been rejected by a previous study in the 90s. So it's bad and it's getting worse, right? So this befits my gloomy Scottish temperament. This is something that we should be deeply concerned about. Now, why can't you get access to the cell line or to the plasmid that you saw described in this fabulous article? Well, there are 3 obvious reasons. First, it's a hassle to produce it. I've got to take a graduate student and say, hey, go produce that cell line again, right? Or just respond to your email. I mean, it's just a hassle. Second, scientists, like lots of other people, are often secretive and desire to get the credit for the scientific discovery themselves. The credit economy in science is very important, actually has lots of beneficial effects. And they say, well, I want to get that next Science or Nature publication out of this cell line. Why should I give it to you? You might actually see in it something that I didn't. See principle number 1. So I'm not going to give it to you. Third difficulty, there's a legal relationship has to go on here, or at least is supposed to, which generally involves the tech transfer office in the university, who has to do what's called a material transfer agreement between the two entities. So here's a nice depiction of this. One of your colleagues at Big Ag Inc. or Big Ag University says that she'd be happy to send you her transposon insertion lines that saturate the right arm of chromosome 9. You'll just need to have a material transfer agreement signed by your institution. 6 months later, the terms of the agreement are still under negotiation. You've missed the field season. Your grant's expired, and there's now a better resource that's been developed at Little Ag University. And if you start negotiating your MTA now, this is a huge problem. Everyone agrees it's a huge problem. There have been efforts to resolve it by creating standardized material transfer agreements. The drafts of those are actually pretty decent, but they have limitations. First, scientists don't understand them. Second, tech transfer officers frequently hang stuff on it. Oh, and just one extra thing. Maybe we'd like a reach through. Or maybe this is the thing that's going to produce the next Viagra. So let's just, make sure that we get some of that. And that, of course, causes another cycle of negotiation. But to be clear, the legal hassle, the transaction cost, the friction, is only 1/3 of the total cause of slowdown here, right? It's only one issue. Now, here's a radical thought. What if we tried to put the same ingenuity that we put into allowing teenagers to flirt online in MySpace, or the same ingenuity we put into making it really easy to buy books at Amazon.com and make it easy to know what kind of books you might like? What if we put that kind of ingenuity into this? I mean, looking at this isn't even like capitalist efficiency. This is like feudal efficiency. This is like, I'll handcraft you a matchlock musket, right? It's not like point and click, right? I mean, this isn't even pre-digital. This is barely Gutenberg in the way that it approaches the world, right? We'll have people crafting individualized agreements, negotiating, whatever. This is just insane, particularly when science depends on it. So what could we do? There's the Uniform Biological Material Transfer Agreement. This is good, as I said, but has the problems that I mentioned. People try and add things to it. It has an additional problem. It only works between universities or between nonprofit entities. It doesn't work between a university and a for-profit company. And if you talk to people who are biotech or pharma people, they will tell you that they hate universities with a passion because they find it almost impossible to license anything from them. And by the way, this isn't confined to the biological sciences. People like IBM, et cetera, will tell you exactly the same thing elsewhere, right? So it's a general problem. I'm focusing on biomechanical right now just because it's a nice, easy example set. So wouldn't it be nice if you had something like this, a Creative Commons-like form, but done for materials? So that we say, okay, everything in John Seeley Brown's lab is licensed under the blank license, which means so long as you're not directly profiting from commercial gain, you're good to go. And that was announced in advance, in a machine-readable way. And here's the really cool part, that when you went to JSB's article and clicked on the footnote that says, we use this plasmid, it popped up and said, oh yeah, this is available under the Science Commons license number 1. And wouldn't it be even cooler if it could say, and here's where you can get it. $24.95, please enter your credit card, right? Wouldn't that be great? Now that's a system that ought to exist. No one benefits from the current system except people like me who train lawyers, who produce and then resolve transaction costs. But honestly, we shouldn't be optimizing the scientific system for me. I mean, thank you for doing it. I appreciate it. It shows good-heartedness on your part. We're worried that Jamie won't have a job. We want to make sure there's as much friction as possible in the scientific process so that he will have to train the people who will partially, one at a time, resolve it. It was nice of you, but actually I think I'm okay. So wouldn't it be great if we could do that and produce something like that, right? And make that not just human readable, notice this is the human readable part, but make it also machine readable so that the machine could track it. And here's, you might say, well, okay, but that only takes care of the legal problem. Well, listen, if we could only take care of the legal problem, that in itself would be huge. But you're actually wrong, I believe. Why? Because if we get rid of the legal problem, then a market starts to jump up for people who say, look, if this stuff is pre-cleared, I can produce it a lot more efficiently than you. And that could be a non-profit or it could be a for-profit intermediary who becomes, the eBay of plasmids or the generic manufacturer of plasmids. What's more, increasingly, given our ability in genetic technology, we're actually going to be printing stuff out from the genetic level. The data is going to be the same as the material as time goes on in a lot of the biotech stuff. I mean, not in the more complex biologics, but certainly in simple gene sequences, we're going to be able to actually just to have, okay, here's my gene synthesizer, print me one out. So what does that do? Well, it might cut down on the hassle. What else could it do? Well, imagine if this stuff was tracked so that we knew that John Seely Brown's plasmids or cell lines were used 80% more than by anyone else at his university. Right now, he gets zero credit for this. He's just a schmuck for spending his graduate students' time making those cell lines because he gets nothing out of it, except, you know, a warm, fuzzy feeling because he's a good guy. But I want that to be part of the tenure process, part of the credit economy, not a replacement for scientific publications, but something where you can say, and what's more, this lab is really hot in terms of coming up with useful research tools. What does that do? Maybe that cuts down on this increasingly, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Because if you can get reputation by giving stuff away, then everybody's happy. I mean, you all know academics in the humanities and law. It's like, if we could hand out our reprints at funerals, we would do so. It's like, no, it's short, you'll love it. You know, it's like, it's driven by the same thing. The economists are, to be honest, engaged in reification when they say, oh, the human desire for self-promotion cannot be given up. You idiots, you want to make everything free and sharing, you can't do it. No, we don't give up on it, we harness it so that I can be bigger and better than you and more important by giving more stuff away than you do, right? That's the smart way to have the cycle run, not the other way around. See principle number 2. Okay, so standardized licenses, permission given in advance, allow repositories to fulfill requests, and this is a partially completed picture. What I'm describing here, I think, are 3 projects that I think are worthwhile. 1, CC Learn, lowering the barriers to both technical and legal so that supposedly open educational material can truly interoperate with each other. So that we stop, I mean, let's face it, most OER sites aren't even Web 1.0 yet, right? They're sort of like, here's my stuff and it's in my little castle. Let's break down some of those walls. 2, starting to show the possibilities of the semantic web. This is an experiment, right? Maybe it totally fails. That's data 2, right? But showing people in practice what you might be able to do. And when we've done this with scientists, they've got really, really excited. And try and get the scientific enterprise to work on creating open data sets and profiting therefrom, both in career terms and eventually financially. 3, eliminating to the extent possible, but at least minimizing the transaction costs in the flows of scientific materials, stuff, the raw stuff on which the scientific enterprise in the biomedical space actually runs. So I think I'm very excited by them. I'm excited by each of them, as you can tell. But I also think they're a model for something else. They're a model that is applicable more generally. This is an idea that scales. What's the model? The model is trying to understand how we can use the web and the social potential of the web and the technology of the Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 social and metadata stuff, in order to break down barriers in the educational and scientific fields in the same brilliant, relentless way that those have been broken down in the commercial fields. Because let's face it, in the education and science field, in web time, it's 1995, right? We just aren't doing all the things that Flickr and Delicious and Technorati, et cetera, right? So the first idea is let's harness that technology for our problems. The second question is, whose job is it to minimize transaction costs in science and education? I don't know, but it ought to be somebody's. I mean, maybe it's the National Science Foundation, maybe it's the Hewlett Foundation, maybe it's Creative Commons, right? But right now, everyone has a bunch of projects, but no one is in charge of the interface between the projects. That idea scales. That idea is applicable elsewhere. Think about the interface, which, of course, is the theme of the conference. Thank you very much. I saved exactly 10 minutes for questions.
More like the gene sharing,
Right.
bacterium sharing.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, I'm sure you've thought this through, but it might be worth mentioning. The other question I have is one of the questions.
Okay, no. I'll answer. I'll do the first one, and then you ask another one because it's a great question. So, the question. She said it was a great talk, by the way. The question. Diana Roden from the National Science Foundation. The question is, what about the unintended consequences of openness? And there are a lot, particularly in the biomedical field. Everything I was describing sounds great until you realize that one of the cool things that you can do with synthetic biology now is a bunch of scientists said, hey, guess what? We managed to assemble a fully functional smallpox virus using, available stuff off the web. Isn't that great, right? So, so openness, it would be, of course, openness has costs and dangers, just as closed does. They include security, the exposure of proprietary material, stuff which is actually patented and which shouldn't be out there, privacy, right? So there are enormous issues to be confronted, and I fully agree with that. So, for example, I would not be in favor of, throwing out, make your handy smallpox, the open smallpox generator doesn't strike me as a particularly good idea. And it seems to me that there's a lot of research where there are very good reasons to say we want to be careful about how this information goes. Having said that, remember that this is, as with cryptography, a two-edged sword. If you want people to work on curing a disease, they need access to the disease. And as with cryptography, the best way of ensuring security may not be to hold onto it and let nobody else see it. As they say in cryptography, anyone is smart enough to come up with a system which he couldn't break. But what about the rest of us, right? So it's more complex, right? The relationship, even with the dangerous stuff, is actually quite complicated. There, for example, one might imagine regional consortia working on issues where within their space you have a mini-commons, but it's not one that everybody else gets in. So this is a huge issue, and it has to be case by case. Having said that, there's a vast amount of material which right now we say there's like zero danger here. I routinely grant these requests. There's no privacy information, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems to me that the way this works is you start off by getting a bunch of university heads and heads of labs, people like Hal Varmus, who say, of course we're going to do this for this chunk of stuff. We're just going to try with this chunk of stuff, and at the end of 6 months, let's see how it's running. And then you gradually scale up. So let me say again, I'm not saying at all openness is always right, at all. Often you want control for reasons of privacy, for reasons of IP, for reasons of security, etc. All I'm saying is we're not very good at seeing where openness would actually be better, and in this case, I think there's a huge array of low-hanging fruit that we could reach with great ease without triggering those concerns. But after that, great caution is needed. I think it's now working if you want to do question number 2.
I think the point is we need to.
That's the only one that's working, of course.
Like a comedy show. I think so. One of the things that I think interests us at the foundation is trying to do some research on what is the right balance between open and closed as the open movement goes forward, because I think we're triggering a lot of really fascinating sociological questions and scientific questions. The other question I had, similarly, finding that.
Could you speak just a little closer to it? Sorry, they can't hear you.
Finding that balance between sort of the local. So if we think about, you mentioned having not creating a general portal that gives you access into the world of science, and now everything is interoperable and interchangeable, but something along those lines. But there's that question of what is the right balance? Let's say I'm an astronomer, and there's legitimacy for me to go to an astronomical site that's astronomy specific versus going to the meta science portal. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about how do we find that balance between local legitimacy, homegrown recognition, and sort of general interoperability as we go forward in this interface world.
Excellent. So just, I think that went through, but I'll just repeat part of it, which is the concern with credentialing, authenticity, accrediting. That's also one of the functions of a closed system. Remember when I was talking about the encyclopedia, part of it was I know I can trust it because it's there. And this is definitely something that we need to think about. It's not enough to just sort of blurt all the stuff out onto the web and think that you've thereby solved the problems. The actual experience in things like archive.org, which is the repository, started out with high energy particle physics and astronomy, and which has expanded beyond that, is actually that the communities themselves are pretty good at setting up internal filters. I mean, peer review, the web and science both really run on peer review. Google is effectively a crude peer review system. It's a water hole. You know, it's like, how do you find the water hole? One vision is to have a map made by a cartographer. The other vision is follow the tracks of the animals and see where they lead, right? Google is model 2. And it seems to me that one of the benefits of the metadata here is that you actually get much better senses of where the animals are going. And that, in turn, provides you with evidence of scientific consensus, right? So I think that the open system is itself a kind of mechanized peer review which needs to be intelligently fused with formal peer review, which I'm not at all giving up on, right? Because we all know how idiotic computer-based technologies can be. But I think a meld of the two can actually deal with the credentialing issue. And there's actually some useful comparative study done elsewhere in citation patterns in the humanities, for example. I mean, one of the other things that really irritates me is that people aren't talking across disciplines in this. There's a ton of knowledge elsewhere where we sort of experimented with these things. Just to give one very simple example, all of real property law is an experiment which has been going on over several thousand years about what the right balance between private closed space and open public roads is. Would you be better off sitting on your house if you and your neighbors divided up the roadway between you and there was no public space? No, you'd be much worse off because you'd have to pay a toll to get to work through every landowner's land through which you passed. Public roads enhance the value of private property. We understand that very clearly in the real property space. Even, strong libertarians understand that very clearly. Even. In the intellectual space, we're not, our intuitions just aren't that good because we've been trained dealing with property that looks like this, right? So property looks like this is rival. If I have it, you can't have it. And it's just like someone who's been trained in a gravity field and now has to work in free fall. All our reflexes are off when we go into this new space. But if we think about it, there are analogies that we can use and good literature that's out there.
Okay, thanks for a fantastic talk which really wakes you up.
Thank you.
I never knew what lawyers can be so engaging,
Low expectations, that's the key.
Yeah, okay, so here's a question. I mean, you're absolutely right that, one of the key problems of our society is that we're generating data at a much higher rate than our ability to data mine it, index it, etc. And I was wondering if any of the bodies or organizations with whom you're working in started to think about the following idea. As opposed to simply creating better and better search tools, what about trying to look at the redundancy in data? Right?
Redundancy?
Yeah. Let me give you an example. Okay. Again, I mean, I understand we are not computer scientists here, so we will not be able to solve it, but we can tell foundations, well, you guys go find people to do that. So, for example, I'm looking for the image of a chair, right, on Google image search, as opposed to giving me 10 million pictures. It will say, well, there's like 40 different chair types, right? It will, etc. The reason I'm saying it is that, when you think about science publications versus humanities publications, right? So science publications give you this nano advances, but usually it's a new information. Somebody did experiment which somebody else hasn't done. If you look at humanities publication, the redundancy is huge. You have one paper which is race, class, gender, disability in France, in France, TV show, when you have another paper, race, class, gender, disability, and I don't know, Star Trek, right?
Right.
So the redundancy is huge. So, and of course we can't solve it because that's like a, real hard AI problem. But as you said with search, even if we can just just make it like 1% better, right? And I'm, the reason I'm asking you is actually going to lots of technical conferences like ETech. Yeah. I actually never heard people going in this direction. So I'm just wondering what you think about.
No, so great question. I think that there isn't a single answer to it. I mean, I think one answer comes from my exposure to the world of libraries. So if you talk to people who run digital repositories, they describe, how fabulous their system is and all the different metadata fields that they have and how, elaborately they theorize the whole thing to put it together. And then after a few drinks, they confess, no one uses it. Right. What if you had tagging, some of it intentional, some of it automatic? 57% of the people who search for race, class, gender in France focused on this article, right? Right now our systems don't do that, which is kind of crazy, right? So, and part of it is, if you go to Flickr, you list the photo sharing site, you see people tag these photos, and anyone can tag a photo, multiple tags. It turns out it's because it's so cheap to store information, the answer is redundancy, because one person out there has the weird cast of mind that I have that causes me to view this particular picture of test tubes in a particular way, and they will have tagged it so that I can find it. And so it's really, this is an application of the many eyeballs, with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow notion, which is how Google already works. And I just think it's astounding when you look at the scholarly world, how little we have learned from that. In humanities or sciences. It's like, we're back at, I remember the text search engines that I used, the Boolean algebra search engines that I used in sort of legal databases in the 1980s. That's where we are. So a lot of that, I think, is the answer. But that's only one answer. I think there are lots of others.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.